Hello and welcome to today's ALSC webinar, How to Write Successful ALSC Webinar and Course Proposals. Our speakers today are representatives from ALSC's Education Committee, Danielle Hartsfield, Rachel Reinwald, and Barbara Spears. A couple of housekeeping items before we begin. First, if you lose sound during your presentation, please try exiting the room and coming back in. It also helps if you have nothing else running on your computer, as Adobe Connect is a large program. If the sound is coming in faintly and you have your speakers turned up as loudly as possible, try listening with a pair of headphones. You'll be receiving a link to the recorded presentation in case you'd like to reference it while working on future proposals. So without further ado, I'll turn things over to our speakers.
Hello everyone, and thank you so much for coming to the webinar today. One thing that we would like to let you know as we get started is it's a bit easier on our part to wait until the end to answer your questions. So if you wouldn't mind just holding on to those until the very end of the presentation, we'll give you an opportunity to type your questions into the chat box and we will respond to them. So to introduce ourselves, my name is Danielle Hartsfield and I'm an assistant professor in the Teacher Education Department at the University of North Georgia, and I am co-chair of the Education Committee, and this is my third year on the committee. Rachel?
My name is Rachel Reinwald. I am the school liaison at Lakeville District Library, also the Youth Services Librarian. I teach one of the ALSC online courses right now, and this is actually my first webinar, and I'm also on the Education Committee.
And at the moment, I am seeking employment as an online instructor. But I started out as a children's librarian, and then I became children's services head in a large library. Eventually, I became a branch manager, several different branches, but I always loved my work in children's and always insisted on covering story times for 2-year-olds and ages 3 to 5. I'll always treasure those experiences.
So we have a few objectives that we would like you to, or that we will be focusing on today in the webinar. So the big idea that we want you to take away is what types of teaching opportunities we have available within ALSC, and we would also like you to come away with this from this webinar having a clear understanding of how the process works to become an instructor for ALSC and how to submit a successful proposal for either a webinar or a course. So we have two different types of continuing education opportunities, or you can think of it as two different opportunities to become an instructor for ALSC. The first is a webinar, and you already know something about that because you are in one right now. So with webinars, they are usually about an hour long. Sometimes they might be a little bit shorter, a little bit longer, but generally we shoot for about an hour. They're synchronous, meaning that they occur in real time, and we use this platform called Adobe Connect that you're in right now to do our webinars. And we don't require you to do any sort of assessment or evaluation of your webinars, so that's something to consider when you submit a proposal, and we do compensate you $100. Just so you are aware, if you have an idea for a webinar that you think might take more than an hour, you can consider submitting a proposal for a multi-part webinar. We have had some of those in the past and actually have a couple multi-part webinars coming up in the future. So with webinars, usually the topics that we present in webinars tend to be like practical ideas and tips that can be implemented fairly readily in your library setting. Usually webinars are about successful programs and other initiatives that you've taken in your library. For example, a couple of years ago, we had a webinar called So You Want to Genreify Your Library, and it was presented by some school librarians who had looked at some different alternatives to the Dewey Decimal System, and they explored and they talked about their that journey that they took within their school library. So those are great topics for webinars. They're fairly small in scope and pretty manageable to accomplish in about an hour. Courses, on the other hand, tend to be broader in scope. They do require more time and study. A very good example is actually Rachel's course that she's teaching called Demonstrating ALSC Competencies, and Rachel, please jump in if I am incorrect, but her course is about developing goals and creating a professional learning plan based on the ALSC competencies. So as you know, if you've ever seen the competencies document, we have a lot of ALSC competencies, so it would take a lot of time to really get to know those and to formulate goals. related to each one of those competencies or even a selection of those competencies. So that's Rachel's course is a really great example of a big topic that really needs some time to flesh out. So courses tend to be about 4 to 6 weeks long. They are asynchronous, meaning that participants in your course are able to do reading assignments and post to the discussion board on their own time. They don't have to be in a certain time in a certain place in order to participate. So courses are pretty flexible for people who have jobs and have busy lives. So courses work pretty well. I'm a full-time professor, and I actually took an ALSC course on the Caldecott Medal last spring, and it was great because I was able to do the work in the evenings when I had some free time. We use a learning management system for courses called Moodle. It's pretty straightforward. In a couple slides, Rachel's going to share some information about that. With courses, we do require presenters or instructors to have some sort of course evaluation so that participants can give feedback about how the course went and how the course can be improved. With courses, ALSC pays $700 to instructors to develop the course. And the first time that you develop a course, you receive 15% of the registration fees. However, if you teach the course subsequent times, you receive 20% of the registration fees. So this is a look inside webinars. Webinars are audio only, so you don't have to worry about having a webcam or showing yourself on screen. I know sometimes that makes people nervous. And you don't even have to have your own headset. ALSC will mail you one to use for a webinar if you're teaching for us, so that's really convenient. Participants can engage with you during a webinar by typing questions or comments into the chat box, which you can actually see on your screen. And I'm not sure if you're able to see the little hand icon that I'm moving, but it appears there on my little screenshot. There are arrows in the bottom left corner that you can use to advance slides or go back. It's pretty much just like presenting a PowerPoint, which I'm sure a lot of people have experience with. And one nice thing is that the ALSC staff gives you an opportunity to rehearse webinars before you go live. So if you want a chance to experience Adobe Connect and get familiar with it and feel comfortable before your webinar, they will give you that opportunity to do so. So by the time presentation day comes, you're already a pro and you know exactly what's going on. So next, Rachel's going to talk to you more about courses and what those are like.
All right, so we thought it'd be nice to show you what the inside of a course looks like before you need to turn in a proposal, because for me it was kind of hard to know how I could arrange my different assignments if I didn't know what activities were available. So this is basically what the homepage of my Moodle looks like for my class right now, and you can see there's headings with dates on it. So what I try to do is I put all of the activities and attachments and readings for each week that it's due inside of that week, so it's a little bit easier to navigate. And then like the syllabus, my contact information, and like the blank templates are at the top. There's different things that you can add into the course. And all of the stuff that I put inside of that week is due by the end of the week. So if someone has work or they're going out of town, they already know what's going to be going on, and all of my assignments are open so that if they need to turn in stuff earlier or later, they can. You might want to keep that in mind because most of the people taking these classes are either doing it during work or have another full-time job. Different things that you can add in are you can embed links, you can upload articles or documents, and you can add different activities and capabilities like discussion boards, and I'll go into that in a little bit. If you make worksheets that you want participants to do, so if you look at the top of my page, I have the SMART Goal template PDF, and then I also have a fillable version that's in Publisher because that's what I made it in. So I like to have a fillable version of all worksheets, and then I also have PDF so that if the person doesn't have a computer that's compatible with that software, they can still use it. So they would print it out, fill out the worksheet, and then scan it and turn it in to me in the assignment section. And then we also have discussion boards that you can add in, and you'll see where it says interview questions for each week. That's a discussion board. It's called a forum in the Moodle. And you can ask questions and then people respond to it, and it'll show you who's responding to what. Now we're going to look at different things that you can add in. Every time you go to add something into the Moodle, it's almost like making a website. So you can add different elements, and these are some of them. So there's assignments, and chat is kind of fun because that's real time. So when I was in another class and they had chat, they would schedule it for like Tuesday mornings from 11 to 11:30, and whoever was in the course could take that chat, and then if they couldn't make it, the summary of it and the transcript would be available for them to read and respond to in the forum boxes. So the forum is the discussion board, and then you can add other things like different types of assignments and quizzes, and we'll go into quizzes in a second. But when you do assignments, there's a couple different formats you can do, and they're graded in different ways. So if you look at the link at the bottom of the page that says docs.moodle.org, that's actually like a guide for how to use all of these things, and this is a direct link to the activity types. So when you click on it, it shows you how to use each of those activities in advance before you're required to make it for your class. And then when you're making quizzes, if you do it inside of the Moodle, it's graded right away automatically. So these are the different types of questions you can do, and they look kind of weird because it's more about either how the question functions or how it's graded. So to get explanations of those, you can go into the Moodle document. If you don't like how the Moodle has the assignments and the quiz types, you can add your assignments in as a separate document. And when you're grading assignments or quizzes on here, you can grade them on a scale. You can choose not to grade them at all, or you can just mark which assignments have been completed or not. So this should match what you're teaching and the dynamic you want to have. So for example, for my school library collaboration class, I had graded assignments. And it was on a scale, and each assignment had a rubric that went with it that the participants got before they needed to turn in the assignment, so they knew what was expected and how they would be graded. And then when they got the feedback back, they knew what they got lower points on and what to change in their assignment. Since I wanted my YS competencies class to be more about reflection, goal setting, and peer support, I had assignments, but they weren't graded. The way it works is there was detailed feedback from me, the instructor, and then students were also required to respond to other students to kind of develop what we were doing, because one of the things was you had to prove a competency on your e-portfolio. So you'd have a website, and you'd have a picture or artifact of something that you'd done, and you explained how you met the competency, and then everyone else in the class would leave comments on, oh, hey, if you tried this picture instead, or could you explain a little bit more about this? And we did the same thing for our SMART goals and our interview questions, which we used as other assignments. So if you want to learn more about the different question types you can put in these quizzes and assignments, you can go on the Moodle Docs page at the link at the bottom of the page, and it'll explain more about it.
So there are lots of good reasons for teaching for ALSC. We did a survey some time ago of past instructors of ALSC webinars and courses, and some big themes that popped up are the fact that teaching for ALSC really opens the door to some professional opportunities. Like you can see the quote on the slide indicates that this particular instructor was invited to do some conference presentations as a result of the course that she taught for ALSC. It's certainly something that looks good on a CV or a resume. And other instructors have said that teaching courses is a really wonderful opportunity for networking because they get to meet so many other professional librarians, and they get to interact and perhaps come up with opportunities to collaborate. So many good reasons, but those are just some big ones that our previous instructors have told us about. So next we are going to take a look at what is actually involved in a proposal for a webinar and a course. And the proposal form for both can be found online using the link shown on the slide. Usually you can just Google ALSC online course proposal form and it'll come right up, so it's really easy to find. So proposal forms have a number of different components, and we are going to talk about those individually so we don't overwhelm you with information and you're just looking at one slide. So Barbara is going to lead us off with that. Barbara.
Okay, if you could, I'm not seeing the arrows, so if you could change the slide for me, that'd be great.
Sure, no problem. Barbara, are you seeing the title and description slide?
Is that number 13? I'm doing 13.
Does it say title and description?
Yes, it does.
Okay, great. That's what's up there now.
Okay, I'm actually doing learning outcomes. Is that?
There you go.
Okay. All right. Frustrations on the part of the participant can occur if there is a misalignment in your webinar. In other words, there could be a disconnect between what you've taught in the webinar and what you want participants to have learned by the time the webinar ends. So just consider this. Just consider creating your webinar by using a backward design. Now, most of us, if we're teaching or facilitating a subject, we focus on the content that we want to teach instead of looking at the end of our course or our webinar. Now, with backward design, you can ask yourself this question. What do I want the participants to know, to be able to do, and to value at the very end of the webinar? A backward design will help you focus on the learning outcomes. And learning outcomes should be active, and a good tool for thinking about this activity that should be taking place is Bloom's taxonomy. It has several lists of active verbs to include in your outcomes. Objectives and outcomes should be focused on the participant, the person who is actually sitting and taking your webinar. And this way of thinking will help participants learn where am I going to end up? Is this worth my time? So where will I end up? Outcomes should also be attainable and relevant and measurable and specific. And so I came across a rubric. It's by R. Neil Johnson from the Schreier Institute for Teaching Excellence, Penn State. It's basically, if you could envision yourself as a student, just for this particular moment, and think about being tasked with having to, or tasked with having to come up with objectives that are specific and measurable and clear and related. So this rubric is designed for peer review of course objectives or student learning outcomes. And across the top are these four concepts that I mentioned: specific. So in other words, outcomes need to be specific, they need to be measurable, they need to be clear, they need to be related. And you can be graded on this. If you're indeed the student and someone else is teaching how to create objectives or outcomes. So for example, under specific, you could be graded a 4 if each objective is distinct from the others and highlights learning that will result by the end of the course. However, you could be graded a 3 if most objectives are distinct, but 1 or 2 may have some overlap that can be eliminated with some additional rewriting. You could be graded a 2 if there is a fair amount of overlap in objectives and many are not specific enough to be distinguishable from the others. What about a 1, which is the lowest grade that you could be graded? Course objectives are so broad and so vague that one has no idea what this course is really about. Under measurable, you could be graded a 4 if the objectives utilize only active verbs that can be measured and that are not redundant. No non-functional verbs are present. The reader can map the objectives to various levels of skills on Bloom's taxonomy. and so forth and so on. Under clear, for example, you could be graded a 4. Taken together, the objectives present a very clear picture of course purpose and learning outcomes. The objectives present a set of actions that students would understand and could readily agree to. But the very last grade, the lowest grade, for example, under clear, you could be graded a 1. It is unclear what students would be doing in this course or webinar, or why. They would lack confidence in the purpose of the course and would likely just not come, maybe. So just to end with maybe a few examples of what I'm talking about. If you, for example, were teaching a course or a webinar just a bit on professional and technical writing, for example. The objective is, by the end of the course, you should be able to, and the outcomes are, identify the primary and secondary audience, craft texts, write in an array of genres, identify different strategies, use various rhetorical strategies. What if you were teaching a course or quickie webinar on elementary Spanish? By the end of the course, students should be able to perform a variety of communicative functions with a novice level of accuracy and fluency. Some of these functions would include, for example, the participant will be able to, at the end of the webinar, introduce oneself appropriately, talk about daily routines, describe family relationships and members, communicate about preferences, likes and dislikes, participate in a situation where items are bought or exchanged, describe and order food, talk about celebrations and personal relationships. Kristen?
All right, I just wanted to head back to the title and description slide. I may have gotten ahead of myself by asking Barbara to talk about the learning outcomes, so I apologize for that. But the learning outcomes are really important, and we definitely look for strong, clear, and measurable objectives when we evaluate course proposals among members of the education committee. So a title and description, well, a title is exactly what it sounds like. Your title should summarize the content and give potential participants some idea of what your webinar or your course is going to be about. And if you can, it's great if you can make the title catchy. I know that's a real skill, and that's something I wish I could be better at. One recent example is so you want to get published. So that definitely is a question that catches your attention, and it gives you a sense of what that webinar was about, which is about getting your articles published and so forth. So the description section of the webinar and course proposal form really just should be a paragraph giving an overview of your webinar and of your course, and it should explain why your webinar or course will be useful to participants and why it is important. So skipping back ahead to the target audience and prerequisites. So your target audience is a section of the proposal form where you should consider who is going to benefit from taking your course or participating in your webinar. So some examples might be a children's librarian at the beginning of their career. We do want you to be specific with that. And you don't necessarily have to have a target audience that's completely made up of people in the library profession. You can also think outside of libraries. For example, we've had a number of webinars that would be very useful for teachers to participate in. Or you might want to think about community organizations that might benefit from taking your course or your webinar. And in terms of the level and prerequisites, things that you want to consider is how much prior knowledge about your topic should participants have? Are they at a very beginning level? Should they have some kind of advanced knowledge of your topic? So that's something you want to specify in your webinar or course proposal. You also want to think about any technology that you expect participants to be able to use in order to effectively function in your webinar or your course. Biography and resume. So this stuff is pretty straightforward, but it is part of the proposal form. So a biography is just a paragraph, 3 or 4 sentences about you, the current position that you hold, what responsibilities you have at your position, any pertinent degrees that you have, and you might also want to mention things like if you are a book reviewer or you do some freelance writing. Those are things that you could also include in your biography. And then we ask you to upload a resume or CV. You can, upload a Word document or a PDF. Either one is fine, but whichever document that you decide to upload, it should be an up-to-date overview of the degrees that you hold and any professional experiences that would be relevant for us to know about. So syllabus and teaching references. So for a webinar, you do not need to submit a syllabus, but you do need to write an overview of what your webinar will be addressing in the description section of the proposal form. However, for a course, you do need to put together a syllabus. Generally, they're several pages long. I don't think in my time in the education committee I've seen one that's 30 pages long or anything like that. But there are some things that we look for in a quality syllabus when someone is applying to be an instructor for a course. We do want an overview that's, usually a paragraph explaining what the gist of the course is. We also look for those learning objectives. Again, very clear, very measurable learning objectives. And we also look for some assignments. And one part of the syllabus that we really look at is the sequence that you have. Usually what we like to see is that you have laid out week by week what is going to be happening in your topic. What topics are you addressing in week 1? What topics are you addressing in week 2? And so forth. And related to each of those topics, we like to see things like any reading assignments. Those could be journal articles. They could be articles that are freely available online. It could be a blog post, whatever you feel as the instructor is important for your participants to read. We also like to see that you have assignments laid out in the syllabus. Assignments could be something like Rachel was talking earlier about having participants in her course create an artifact related to the ALSC competencies. So that's one example. And you can also have discussions laid out week by week. For example, in the Caldecott class that I took last spring, we had a different topic every week, like different kinds of media or different kinds of artwork. And we were asked to read particular Caldecott medal and honor books and asked to talk about them on a weekly basis. And that topic shifted week to week throughout the 6 weeks or so of the course. So it's really important that you have that sort of sequence. When I create syllabi for the courses that I teach at the university level, I usually just create like a course calendar and have different columns for different things, like topic of the week, reading assignments, and written assignments due for the week. So that's just one way that you might want to consider setting up your week-by-week schedule when you write a syllabus for ALSC courses. And teaching references, we simply want you to identify 3 different people who can attest to your skills as a presenter. All right, so next we are moving on to pre-course evaluations. Barbara?
Actually, I have 19 and 20. I can post-course evaluations.
Okay,
so how will... Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Why don't I jump in with the pre-course evaluations, Barbara, and then we'll forward it to the post-course evaluations, if that's okay?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, it'll just make more sense that way. So with your pre-course evaluations, we want you to come up with some way of determining what your participants in your course, and again, this does not apply to webinars, already know about the topic that you're teaching about. So this could be something really informal, like a survey, just some general questions. You could just have a discussion within the Moodle about what participants already know about the topic and some questions that they have about the topic. What do they want to gain from taking your course? And we have some examples here on the slide that have actually come from pre-course evaluations used by previous instructors. Like we had a course recently about interactive fiction, and the instructor wanted to know which of his participants in his course have actually read some interactive fiction and knew what it was all about. All right, now we'll move on to post-course evaluation. Go ahead.
Okay, slide, please. Oh, thank you. How will you determine that participants have met the learning outcomes that you specified? We spent a little bit of time talking about learning outcomes. And if you have indeed used the participants as the focal point for developing and creating your outcomes, then you'll probably have a very satisfactory post-course evaluation. These post-course evaluations will give you the ability to tweak your webinar and to make changes in the event that the evaluations look as if there maybe simple changes need to be made. Kristen? But I'm not an expert, so suppose you're not an expert, but you're passionate and you're happy about the work that you do, working with families, working with children, and your enthusiasm and your passion will help you begin to formulate some kind of documentation so that you can present a certain skill set to your audience. Don't worry about not being an expert. Let your enthusiasm and your passion carry you through.
All right, can I add just a little bit to this? When you do a webinar, it's almost just like a conference proposal. When you go to like the state or national or local conferences, for a webinar, you have an hour and you have a PowerPoint, and this way they can't even see your face. And then if you have a course, it's just spread out. They're not going to be able to hear your voice, and they can finish it in their own time. But it's the same way that you would set up a conference presentation with slides and or assignments. So a lot of people are really nervous and they don't think that they're an expert on the subject. They say, oh, well, this person's the famous person on this topic, but, you know, those people are busy. They might not want to present, and you always bring a unique perspective that they're not going to have. So think about your past conference presentations that you've liked and think about how you could adapt that for a national audience, or any assignments or activities that you can add to it for a course proposal. Another thing to look at is your undergraduate degree or your work experience before entering the library. Since the library is usually a master's program, a lot of people who have had first jobs before this or even first careers. So think about your unique educational and library backgrounds. What other jobs did you have before being in the library? Do they have any insight into how to help library services? So, for example, I have a teaching background, so I know a lot about classroom management, how to structure a program developmentally by age group, and literacy and reading strategies. So I could do a library presentation about any of these topics because they're all applicable to the library. So it doesn't matter how many other people were teachers first as well, because I have a unique perspective and no one has done it yet here. So you can also look at the webinar archives to see what topics have already been covered. And then, of course, our new updated ALSC-YS competencies have a lot of other topics that you can think of. So anything that you know about diversity, family engagement, or any of the other listed topics, and how you specifically go about this successfully. So hot topics that are in ALSC right now is we're looking for a lot of courses and webinars on diversity. So social and emotional skills towards this, teaching for tolerance. You'll see a lot about social justice, how to find and evaluate diverse books to purchase for your library, because we've seen that, you know, in the publishing field, there's only like 20% of them feature people of color, and we have a rate of 35% or higher people of color in actuality, so we kind of want to look for better levels there. Or how to introduce diversity into your story times, like how would you talk about it with a 3-year-old versus like a 6th grader. You can look at best practices in your library. So do you have down a successful way to get something done and use services? It could be collaborating with community partners, running a teen volunteer program to help younger kids practice reading, managing a youth services staff, etc. So what specifically do you do, and how can other libraries reproduce this? You can talk about tips and tricks for getting things done. People are always looking for shortcuts or hacks. Past successful programs that you've had. So think about bigger initiatives at your library and different programs. Which ones were particularly successful that you think another library might want to try and could try? So at our library, we have second grade field trips as our library card drive initiative. So I could talk about that, maybe the different ways that you could have library card drives. We have CPDU programs for teachers to get recertified. We have the 1,000 books before kindergarten. We just changed our summer reading program. We have Scooby-Doo Read, where we have dogs and kids read together to build fluency. And we have a great selection of science and art classes, as well as a big Battle of the Books program and a new collection of margin projects where you can write in the book. So I could pick any one of these topics and talk about how it works in our library, show stats, and give advice for other libraries to try this out. So there's a lot of things that you can do, and you don't have to be an expert at everything. You just have to have a unique perspective that you think is valuable to the library world.
All right, so we are at the point in the webinar when we are ready to take any questions that you have. And I know whenever I'm in a course or sitting in a presentation like this, I oftentimes think of questions after the fact. So if you have anything that you can think of after we're done today, please feel welcome to email me or Margaret Tice, who is the co-chair of the Education Committee. But if you have a question that we can answer for you right now, all you have to do is type in this chat box and hit the enter or return key, and we will be able to see it and respond to you in real time. Okay, so Anne's question, have you ever considered making the syllabus available to potential participants? I think that that's something that would be a decision on the part of the instructor. I think that some instructors probably would be willing to do that so that participants could have a sense of what the course is about and how much work is involved. I'm not sure if, Kristen, you want to speak to that a little bit more?
Yeah, I don't think that that's ever been done before, but it's certainly an interesting marketing tactic, and I think it's something, like Danielle said, as long as the instructor's open to it, I think ALSC would be open to it as well. I see there's a question about fair use play. Does fair use play a role in online courses? Is it a violation of copyright? To be honest with you, I'm not sure that that's an issue that's ever come up, and it's a really good question. As far as anything in the ALSC office, I don't know that we've ever had an issue with that, but it's something that I'm certainly going to put on my list to check out because that's a good question.
One thing that I did for that was if there were articles that I wanted to put up on my course, I made sure that it was published by ALSC or by one of the branches or publications of ALA, and if it wasn't, I provided a link and told them that they could look at it at EBSCO. But then what you have to do is make sure that they can have access to the databases or limit the number of database articles that you give out as assignments so that everyone can complete it.
I also think most of the time if you reach out to the source, if it's not ALSC as the source, if you reach out to them, most of the time they're pretty happy to let you use their resources in your online course, but of course it's always a good idea to run it by them first and to give them credit. Does someone want to tackle?
Sure. Marianne, that's a great question about whether presenting storytime programs and youth programs counts as presenting experience. I would say absolutely. I mean, a presentation is a presentation, and we understand that maybe you haven't had the opportunity to present something like a webinar before, but you have to start somewhere. And, you know, we would certainly welcome people who have never presented webinars before within ALSC. And I also see Anne's question, are we still looking for people to teach webinars or just courses? That's a great question, and I'm glad you brought it up because I meant to mention earlier that we are always accepting proposals for webinars and courses, and we accept them on a rolling basis, so year-round. There's no deadline, and you know, we are happy to receive as many proposals as people are willing to send us.
And kind of to add on to that point is, you know, it's never too early to submit your proposal. So let's say you have a course or a webinar that you have in mind, but you're not going to be able to teach it until October, November. It's still fine to submit it now. A lot of our webinars are scheduled a few months in advance just because we want time to promote them. So never feel like it's too early to reach out or too early to submit, especially if the Education Committee has feedback. That will give us time to kind of work with you and finalize the proposal before it's accepted.
So Anne's question for teaching webinars, how do participants show learning outcomes? Because the webinar is a one-time deal, for the most part, usually you wouldn't, as the presenter, assess participants on whether or not that they have met the learning outcomes. It just isn't really feasible for the webinar format. But we do expect you to have learning outcomes on your proposal form so that participants will have some understanding of what they should know or be able to do as a result of participating in the webinar. But it's not something that you as the presenter would actually assess at a later time.
And I can tackle Maureen's question. She says, I'd like to do a webinar with 2 teachers who are in Connecticut. She's in Florida. Can 3 people present from different places? Absolutely. Barbara, Danielle, and Rachel are all in different areas right now, as am I. So basically what you do is you just log in with a headset on your computer. No special software is required. It's just through your internet browser, just like you guys are doing right now. So you know, we usually try to coordinate time zones, but you definitely don't need to be in the same place. In fact, I don't even recommend it because there can be echoes that are picked up and that kind of thing. So it's almost better if you're all in separate remote places.
Marianne, we do have a number of courses and webinars coming up, but we always welcome proposals. So we are always very happy to receive them. So if you have an idea in mind and you want to talk to us about it, or if you want to just go ahead and submit a proposal, we will be very happy to receive it.
And I just wanted to add one thing to this. When you send in a proposal and you're not sure it's going to work, you can always ask us about it first, or if you send in the proposal, like what happened with my school library one, is we went back and forth a couple of times and they said, oh, well, can you make rubrics for your assignment, and how are you going to make this part of the course clearer for participants? And then my course was a little long, and they didn't want it to take too long for people who had a full-time job while taking the course, so we looked at the length of time for each week. So there's a lot of back and forth. Don't feel like you have to turn in something that's perfect right away, because we'll tell you like what we need because we review all of it as a committee.
And the deadline is on a rolling basis, so you can submit a proposal anytime that you want. We don't have deadlines on a month-to-month or quarterly basis or anything like that. So anytime is a great time to submit a proposal.
Okay, I think that probably wraps up our questions. So thank you all very much. Thanks to Danielle, Rachel, and Barbara, and thanks to all of you for attending. A final reminder that you'll receive an email with a direct link to the recording of this webinar. And if you have any questions about the proposal process, again, please feel free to reach out to any member of the Education Committee or to the ALSC office. We're happy to help you, and we're happy to work with you to develop these proposals because we know that it can be a little bit of a daunting process. So thank you all again, and have a great day.